People have said that I'm waging a war on cars. I have nothing against cars. I drive a car. I get my share of parking tickets.
The Future in Context is taking it to the streets.
Some.
Hoboken Mayor Ravi Bala off the top. His war on cars rap stems from efforts to make streets in his New Jersey city safer. The resistance is real, and so is the progress. That and more on Your Mileage May Vary from The Future in Context.
Sometimes good news is no news. And so we have a responsibility, I think, to make sure that we do cut through the BS and talk about real things happening.
The Your Mileage May Vary panel is back. Skip, Jared, welcome.
Thanks for having us, Paul.
Thank you.
Wanted to talk about what, Jared, you recognized as a bit of a paradox in terms of state streets in American cities. What's going on?
The rate of traffic violence, traffic death, people dying in car collisions or pedestrians being hit by cars, had sort of been on the decline for years, for decades, leading up to 2020. And then in the early days of the pandemic, it just started shooting back upwards. And it was sort of a break from a trend line that sort of a bunch of developed countries had seen, which was, the safety continued to improve. And since the pandemic started, the number of traffic fatalities, traffic deaths, traffic collisions has just continued to go up. We hit I think a 40-year high in terms of pedestrians killed by motorists last year.
What explains that? Fewer people on the streets, more danger on the streets.
Yeah, it's a combination of things, and I don't think anybody has sort of figured out the one factor that's made this trend what it is. But things that contribute to it are, there were fewer people driving in the early days of the pandemic, and so the people who were driving just took more liberties on the road, or just drove more dangerously, more recklessly. There's also been a sort of decrease in enforcement of traffic laws. There's greater sort of impairment. More traffic collisions involve people who are on drugs or under the influence of alcohol. There's people are distracted by cell phones. There's more speeding. It's just this sort of this wave of factors that have contributed to it. All in the context of streets that are designed for speed in many cases.
What does that say about programs like Vision Zero?
Just to sort of set the table on Vision Zero, I mean, it's this sort of movement that's been in place for a couple decades, I guess. I'm not sure exactly when it started, but it started in Europe, I think in Sweden. And basically the idea is that governments, jurisdictions can set a goal of saying that, any traffic death is unacceptable. We don't need to sort of say, well, let's get down to 100 deaths a year. You can say, like, the number we want to reach is zero. Like, no one should die in traffic. We can design around those things. There's a whole sort of suite of techniques and strategies and policies and sort of designs that cities and states can use to reduce traffic deaths. But the idea is that, human error is a fact of life. And if you don't plan around that or design around that, then you're going to keep getting, you're going to keep seeing the sort of the really tragic rate of injury and death.
Skip, do you have some context on Vision Zero, what it is, where it's being played out, and a little bit more background?
Right. Well, we have, obviously a number of cities that have strong Vision Zero policies. They offer guidance in terms of street design and technology and different things like that. I think, the question becomes how much of an impact has it actually made? I was looking earlier at the traffic deaths, traffic fatalities in San Francisco, which has a strong Vision Zero policy, and they remain sort of stubbornly high. In fact, since 2014 they've been trending up, almost every year. So. It remains to be seen just how successful Vision Zero efforts have been in cities. However, you could also say, well, then what would the situation have been like without Vision Zero? Mm-hmm. So maybe I don't want to dismiss Vision Zero at all.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think it's also the case that cities will adopt these big Vision Zero policies, which have a sort of citywide lens. But the actual, if you drill into the actual projects they do, they tend to have a pretty small footprint. So, an intersection here, a highway lane there, gets a little bit of a safer design. And you look at some of the sort of impacts of those specific places that have been redesigned, and I do think they do tend to be safer in the aftermath. But at the level of a city, I mean, there's just so much space that's just been dedicated to cars, and especially to sort of like moving cars quickly through cities, that it's just hard to it's whack-a-mole.
Yeah, and I would say that point right there is very important. The notion of moving cars quickly. Vehicle speed is such an important factor in whether or not someone dies in a crash, whether that person is a pedestrian, a bicyclist, or even someone else, another vehicle. I'm going to stand on that soapbox. It says, until we get vehicle speeds down, I just don't know that we're going to make a huge impact in traffic deaths.
Vehicle weights are getting heavier, which also makes sort of if there's more mass to the vehicle, it's sort of deadlier, more violent when it has a collision. And the other thing I just want to add to that is that there's kind of like two schools of thought, which aren't necessarily competing so much as overlapping, about the speed question. And it's like enforcement and street design are like two sides of a coin. And it's like, enforcing street laws that say the speed limit is 65 or whatever it is, or 25 in a city context, and then also designing streets so that if the speed limit is 25, but it's so wide and set up that you can easily get up to 60 without thinking about it, like you need to sort of align those things a little bit better before you can expect cops to pull everybody over who's breaking the law.
Yeah, street design, very important. And we can psychologically slow down streets purely with better design.
Skip mentioned San Francisco, but Jerry, you found a place, granted a smaller city, where the framework is working. Take us to Hoboken, New Jersey. Introduce us to its mayor.
Hoboken is a pretty tiny city right across the river from Lower Manhattan in New Jersey. It's like one of the most richly served transit communities in America. Like the small streets, like the mayor said, and things like that. But over the last decade or so, it's really put a lot of focus on a Vision Zero program. Before it was called Vision Zero under Mayor Bala, it was called Complete Streets. It's this sort of same suite of strategies. Since he's been in office, he has sort of helped push this program along. And what they're doing is kind of every time they pave a street, they are improving it for street safety. So they spent a lot of time taking out excess sort of parking spaces at the corners of intersections, something called daylighting, so that when you're at an intersection, you can see who's coming down the block the other way, if there's a biker and things like that. They put in some sort of flex posts there to make sure people can't sort of park in those spots and things like that. So there wasn't like a huge history of traffic deaths there to begin with, but they haven't had a single pedestrian death in at least 7 years. So they've had this really great run of safety that has coincided with a concerted effort to make the streets safer.
We heard Mayor Bali use the term traffic calming. That sounds almost therapeutic, but Skip, you were talking about physical barriers and other ways of combating speed and unsafe driving behaviors in other cities. And that probably leads into getting a little bit of a lowdown on the Safe Streets for All projects. Set some context for that, Skip, and what are we seeing there?
The Safe Streets for All, again, it opens up this whole conversation around all users. You design streets for all users. For decades, we've always designed streets just for motorized vehicles. Suddenly now we're thinking about designing streets for all users, whether it be those folks on bicycles or pedestrians. And I think what's important too, especially for cities and counties to understand, is how much money is out there for doing this kind of work. Both the infrastructure package that Congress passed a couple years ago, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, have set up, I think there's, it's about $1.36 trillion just for transportation projects. Obviously, that's all transportation projects. But I think that the takeaway here is that if you have a transportation project in your city or town or county, and you can pretty much make the case for it to get to get some funding, especially if there's a safety component. If it includes a component to make it safer, the funding, there's a lot of funding out there, and I think it's something for county leaders and city leaders to really get on top of, because it's there and it can make a big difference in terms of getting these projects off the ground and moving.
Yeah, the federal Safe Streets for All program, which was created in the infrastructure law, the larger infrastructure law. I think it's $5 billion over 5 years. So
yeah,
and the applications are still they're rolling, they're open. There's applications you can apply for planning grants or for implementation projects, and there's just millions and millions of dollars available for those types of projects at the moment.
Returning to the Hoboken case study, bike lanes and curb extensions played a role in all that. How did bike lanes play out for the mayor?
Yeah, I mean, bike lanes are one of these things that, we talk about how excited city leaders are to apply for federal money for safer streets, which it's very exciting when it's federal money. It's less exciting when you're talking to a community full of neighbors who are at each other's throats about the presence of bike lanes and the sort of, the role they play in mobility in a city.
Hoboken is 1 square mile. It's densely populated. The streets are narrow, and that sometimes it creates opportunities for different forms of traffic calming measures that might not be plausible in other municipalities.
When he was a city councilman, Ravi Bala had voted against a plan that would have basically created a protected bike lane on one of the main thoroughfares in Hoboken, and the city opted instead for a painted bike lane. Painted bike lane is good. It's better than nothing. But I think a lot of studies show that in terms of actually improving safety, not just the safety of the bike lane, but the sort of willingness of people to ride in it, the protected bike lane, which is sort of maybe blocked off by concrete barriers or by a lane of parking so that you're not directly up against flowing traffic as you're riding through the lane, they're just so much better. So, he told me that, he voted against that. But now that he's mayor, he wishes he hadn't, and he wishes that could have been a protected bike lane. I think that,
because of political pressure at the time, and I'll admit I was one of the ones of the city council that was ceded to those interests of the business owners, and we ended up with a Washington Street design that had what's called Class 2 bike lanes. Class 2 bike lanes are bike lanes that are not protected, but they're safer than other bike lanes in the sense they have these kind of green demarcated strips that people know who are driving that these are bike lanes.
The jury is no longer out on whether that's a better idea. It's just one of those things that it's tough to get past any sort of local board because people are used to doing things in a certain way, used to double parking, used to accessing certain streets at certain times of day. They just feel angry about seeing bikers in the street. There's a lot of sort of road rage that just bleeds over into every aspect of mobility and transportation policy.
Not all cities are created alike, so some things that work in Hoboken may not work in other parts of the country, and vice versa. But my hope is that anytime we've achieved this success, it's something that might be able to be applied to other communities as well.
I think it's one of those things where everyone wants the street for them. The person in the car wants the street only for them, as well as the person on the bike wants the street only for them. Right. So, the reality is we all need to share the space, but yes, when it comes to bike lanes, the protected bike lane is a much better option to get people to ride bikes because they feel more comfortable in the bike lane. It's more, especially, and I think that's especially the case for a wider range of bike users. Women have repeatedly said how they feel much more, they feel safer and more comfortable in a protected bike lane as opposed to just the painted stripes on the street. So, yes, they are definitely safer, and they are also a great way to get people on bikes and using them more robustly than they might just the painted lanes.
Still on that subject of safety and feeling safe by the users, there's curb extensions. And I was interested in your interview with the mayor, Jared, that there was considerable resistance to curb extensions before they won out.
Yeah, I mean, curb extensions can mean a couple different things depending on the context, but essentially it's something that, you bring the sidewalk out further into the street so that there's A, more safe space for pedestrians and people crossing the street to get by, and then B, less space for cars. Because one of the things that helps cars speed is the sense that they're not going to run into anything, right? And so if the road's a little bit narrower, people are going to be more likely to slow down a little bit. And so this gets into sort of controversial territory because drivers will always say, well, you're just trying to slow down traffic. And the planner, depending on how sort of brazen they are in their approach, will either say, well, we're not trying to slow cars down, or they'll say, yeah, I mean, we're trying to slow cars down because if you slow down a little bit, everyone's a little bit safer. It's not about sort of removing the ability of people to drive around from place to place. It's about sort of making sure that, the road is designed to match the speed limit a little bit better.
We had an initiative to put what's called curb extensions on the corners, the four corners of every intersection. Two council members who represented those wards said, we don't want any curb extensions. Mm-hmm. We don't want any, and they're called bump outs. Mm-hmm. The reason for them is that they appreciably lessen the crossing distance of the road. And that's very good for children. It's good for seniors. It's good for the disabled. It's just something different. It's something new. Yeah. It's something, and it also is a form of daylighting. Yeah. Daylighting is when you eliminate an illegal spot at a corner by placing a curb extension or a bollard or a rain garden or a bike rack, something that would prevent somebody from parking in that illegal spot that interferes with the sight lines of both the motorists and the pedestrians. Yeah.
A lot of this comes down to parking, and if you're going to take away even a single spot, watch for everyone to come out with their pitchforks.
People have said that I'm waging a war on cars. I have nothing against cars. I drive a car. I get my share of parking tickets.
Ultimately, it takes political will to be able to do these things, because a lot of times they are initially controversial. Not always. It doesn't always stay controversial, however. Yeah. And so you just have to sort of weather the political storm and do what we all know is best, and go forward that way.
There's a public transit overlay to all of this. And in Bala's experience, it would seem that advocates of street safety are sometimes characterized as car haters.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, people talk about the war on cars. They say anytime sort of someone's trying to do sort of streets for all sort of type work, they're doing the war on cars. There's advocates for, multimodal transportation who have adopted that phrase on their own. I think there's a podcast called The War on Cars where the guy talks about safer streets and things like that. That's just part of the soup that Skip was talking about, where it's like, you get these down to the neighborhood level conversation about this stuff, and a driver feels threatened in their daily habits. That's a tough conversation to have. It's like, you're coming after my specific way of getting my life done, kind of thing. In a place like Hoboken, people do have more options. In a lot of other places, there's not good public transit, and so like drivers. Driving is one of the only ways to get around a lot of places.
The mayor conceded to you that as much of a fan as he is of all this stuff, he's had his fair share of parking tickets. But even with that history of parking tickets, he's aspiring to higher office. Where and why?
Yeah, I think the point he was trying to make to me is that, he's like everybody else. He's not some flag waving sort of biker only kind of guy who's never going to get into a car. He drives around. He's got a couple kids. He's lives in Hoboken, and he gets parking tickets when he can't find a spot like anybody else would. He's running for Congress to represent North Jersey.
A member of Congress should be really working with those mayors to say, this is what's available. What are your needs? This is what's available. Let me try to help you get that funding. Yeah. Yeah. And we haven't had that advocate in Washington, and I hope to be that advocate.
Yeah. North Jersey is a wild and woolly political atmosphere, so it'll be interesting to see sort of what happens there. But the point he was trying to make to me was that I don't think that he's going to build his entire campaign around the Vision Zero work he's done at the local level, but that to have somebody at the federal level, a U.S. representative who's had some experience as a mayor trying to implement some of these projects, could help spread the sort of the advocacy for that and the sort of federal support for that kind of work.
There's a bit of a technology angle to all of this, technologies that can help support these infrastructures. It's not just about concrete barriers. There is an expanded suite of technologies that can also help city planners work traffic, both for safety and efficiency. Can you give us an overview of that?
Yes, Paul. What we're seeing in terms of technology is just there is a lot of urban sort of transportation technology out there that can help in areas like we spoke earlier about speed, the speed of vehicles and how do we control speed and that kind of thing. We don't necessarily need a bunch more traffic cops out. There's a lot of ways where technology can help with controlling speeding and whether it's monitoring and perhaps it gets into the comfort level of folks because it means monitoring the speed of people, and it involves traffic cameras probably and different things like that. And that kind of enforcement. So there's that. And then there's a lot of technology that's able to sort of really understand, for example, the safety of a particular intersection and give some really great data to city transportation planners and other city leaders about how to make that intersection safer, monitoring how many near misses there are and even going so far. The company Inrix, for example, has partnered with GM to look at the data, because obviously cars nowadays collect massive amounts of data about how we drive and where we drive and whether or not we drive safely and comparing that data with other sort of on the ground technologies to give it deeper insights into what's making streets less safe and how to make them safer. So I think there's definitely a place for technology in this entire conversation, whether it's in enforcement or what have you. I was reading earlier how Minneapolis, for example, has 40% fewer police officers than it did even a few years ago. So we're not. I think that the notion of having cops writing speeding tickets, that's not a realistic enforcement strategy. Cities are simply going to have to look at other strategies when it comes to enforcing speed limits and getting speed limits down.
This is a bit of an awkward transition, but there was one more thing that I wanted to talk about on this episode, which is the first since the Baltimore bridge collapse. Mm-hmm. People aren't coming to us for breaking news on all of this, but it certainly plays into city infrastructures. And Baltimore is reeling and probably will be reeling from this for a good long time. Estimates are that up to 3 years to fully replace that bridge. Are there lessons to be extracted at this early stage in the response and recovery?
Rebuilding the bridge is going to be a huge, that's the kind of project that takes, if we were starting from scratch, it would take over a decade of planning and sort of funding at various stages, federal, state, local, all that kind of stuff. It'll be expedited because of because it already exists and there'll be federal aid for it probably. But yeah, I mean, what a horrible fiasco to actually witness.
Yeah, rebuilding the bridges is going to be, you don't build a bridge easily. So some say 3 years. I would put it probably closer to 5. And you've got a lot of infrastructure projects going on in the DC metro region. The big, I think it's about a $5 billion tunnel project in the Baltimore area with the Frederick Douglass tunnel, the Amtrak tunnel that's going to replace a much older tunnel. I think that dates to the 1800s, built a little after the Civil War. So much in need of replacing. And that project is moving forward. And so, you have all of these projects that are going to be competing for workers, for supply chain bottlenecks and that sort of thing. So it's to be seen, but nonetheless, it's an enormous job ahead.
Yeah, and let me just add one more thing that I'm not an expert on sort of global trade by any stretch of the imagination, but I mean the port itself is closed while they're sort of cleaning up the channel there, and the length of time that port stays closed could sort of impact the way sort of goods flow across the globe. Like there was a pendulum swing to the East Coast when there was like all those backups at the port of LA during COVID, and like that could swing back to the West again. It's like these things are always in flux. People are always trying to optimize the speed and cheapness with which they can ship stuff. So there'll be untold sort of like impacts of this thing across time. It'll be interesting to see what they are.
And at the end of the day, your mileage may vary. Thanks for this, guys.
You bet. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. Good to talk to you.
Skip Descant and Jared Bray write about infrastructure and transportation for government technology and governing, respectively. They are also our standing panel for Your Mileage May Vary. The editorial and production team also includes Theo Douglas, Zoe Manzanetti, and Kaylee Tedrow. Our executive editor is Noel Nell. Our editors-in-chief, Dustin Heisler and Kathleen Robinette.
Hey, this is Ashley with a quick preview of the next episode of TFIC's Government A to Z. Here's the big idea. All data is connected to a place. Just ask your phone about what's nearby. That is just the beginning. We go deeper with Neil Cook, the Chief Data Officer for the Texas Department of Information Resources. Join Zena, Zoe, and me for a fascinating conversation. The easiest way to make sure you hear it is to subscribe to The Future in Context for free on Apple, Spotify, Odyssey, Audible, and YouTube.
And that will do it for us this time around. For Ashley Silver, I'm Paul Taylor. Thanks for listening. Stay in touch with the show at tfic.tech.